Okay, so we're diving into how democracies die today. And, with the election coming up, I have to admit, I'm a little on edge. And this book you sent over, well, it's not exactly helping.
Yeah,
I mean, picturing the U.S. becoming like an authoritarian regime, it just seems crazy, doesn't it?
it does. It does feel a little far-fetched. Yeah, I agree. And thankfully, a classic coup d'état, that's not really the norm these days.
Right.
But what Levitsky and Ziblatt, what they lay out in this book is way more subtle.
Okay.
They argue that democracies are more likely to die by 1,000 cuts, not one swift blow.
Okay.
It's almost like a political virus.
Oh, okay. So not tanks in the streets, more like a slow poisoning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And Venezuela under Hugo Chavez is a perfect example.
Right.
He didn't seize power in some military takeover.
Right.
He won elections.
Right.
But then, little by little, he started hollowing out the democratic institutions from the inside.
That's what makes it so scary. Because at first it's all like things that sound reasonable, like cleaning up corruption, making the courts more efficient. I mean, who's against that, right?
Right, exactly. And that's how Chavez managed to, pack the Supreme Court and blacklist opponents. He framed it as reform, but it was really about consolidating his own power. By the time people realized what was really going on, well, it's too late. The damage was done.
Wow.
And that's what makes this democratic erosion so insidious.
Right.
It often looks legal, even beneficial to start.
Right. Wow. Okay. So is there any way to spot this happening, like before it's too late? Like, are there warning signs, red flags?
Well, actually, Levitsky and Ziblatt point out two big red flags. First, they say, watch how a leader talks about their opponents.
Okay.
And it's not just disagreeing on policy. It's when they deny their rival's legitimacy altogether. Meaning, like, instead of just saying, I think their tax plan is bad, they are saying they are criminals, they are un-American, they are a danger to the nation. Exactly. Exactly. It's about turning political opponents into enemies of the state.
Right.
And once you do that, well, any action against them becomes justifiable. Debate goes out the window.
Okay. That's terrifying. Okay. What's the second red flag?
Undermining election integrity. Think refusing to accept results, making baseless claims of fraud.
Right.
Basically trying to rig the system to stay in power.
But wouldn't people see through that? I mean, especially if the leader loses.
You'd think so. But the scary part is, even if they win fairly, the damage is done.
Oh, wow.
Because now they've sown seeds of doubt about the whole system.
Right.
And that makes it easier to justify more extreme moves later on.
So it's like a 1-2 punch. First, you paint your opponents as, like, evil, and then you make people question whether the game's even fair. That's chilling. But is this just something that happens in other countries? Surely the U.S. is different, right?
Well, that's the thing. Levitsky and Ziblatt argue that no democracy is immune, no matter how strong its constitution is. And they bring up some really uncomfortable parallels from U.S. history.
Like what?
Well, they talk about Mussolini in Italy.
Okay.
He actually came to power legally. The establishment invited him in, thinking they could control him. And obviously, that backfired spectacularly.
Yeah, talk about a miscalculation.
Right. And what's scary is that it feels like there are echoes of that, even in American history.
Okay.
Look at Senator McCarthy and his communist witch hunts.
Right.
Or George Wallace with his segregationist rhetoric. Both enjoyed huge public support at the time.
Yeah, you're right. It's easy to think that was then, this is now. But the book makes a strong case that we're not as exceptional as we like to think.
Exactly. For a long time, we had political parties acting as gatekeepers.
Right.
They'd vet candidates.
Yeah.
Weed out the dangerous ones before they even got close to power.
They use the example of Henry Ford, right?
Yeah, yeah. Wildly popular in the 1920s, wanted to be president, but the party said, nope, not happening.
Right.
They saw him as unfit, and they used their influence to shut him down. Hard to imagine that happening today.
Well, that's because we have primary elections now, starting in the 70s, that shifted power away from party bosses and gave it straight to the voters. Good and bad, I guess.
Definitely a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it's more democratic, right?
Right.
Ordinary citizens have more say. But on the other hand, it's easier for demagogues and outsiders to bypass those gatekeepers.
Which brings us to Donald Trump in 2016. Tushtvuk example, right? He basically sidestepped the whole establishment, even though both parties were waving red flags.
And the book points out that Trump exhibited many of the warning signs we've been talking about.
Right.
Attacking opponents' legitimacy, spreading conspiracy theories, and showing zero regard for democratic norms.
So in a way, our system is actually more vulnerable to this kind of thing now than it used to be.
It's a real concern,
Yeah.
especially when you factor in the erosion of democratic norms, you know, the unwritten rules that keep things from getting too ugly. Even with good laws, you need these norms. Like, imagine a pickup basketball game without any sense of sportsmanship.
Right.
It would be chaos.
Total chaos. So what are some of these unwritten rules that we need to worry about losing?
Levitsky and Ziblatt highlight two crucial ones:
Okay.
mutual toleration
Okay.
and institutional forbearance.
Okay. Mutual toleration and institutional forbearance. Break those down for me.
So mutual toleration is basically accepting your opponents as legitimate. Even if you hate their guts, hate their ideas,
Yeah.
it's acknowledging that they're not, evil, just people with different views, which honestly can be really hard, especially these days.
Right. Sometimes it feels impossible to even imagine that the other side is arguing in good faith.
Right.
It's all so heated now.
Yeah, and that's exactly what makes this norm so crucial.
Yeah.
Without that basic level of toleration, things get really, really shaky. Because if you truly believe your opponents are an existential threat, well, you're going to be more likely to justify some pretty extreme measures to stop them.
Yikes. Okay, so that's mutual toleration. What about institutional forbearance?
So, that's the idea that you don't abuse your power just because you can. Like, the Constitution might not specifically say you can't do something, but that doesn't mean you should.
So it's more about playing fair,
Yeah.
respecting the spirit of the law, even when there's no rule explicitly saying no.
Exactly. It's about restraint, recognizing that democracy depends on everyone acting in good faith.
And the book gives some examples of when these norms have failed in U.S. history, right?
Yeah.
With pretty disastrous consequences.
Yeah, the Civil War being a prime example.
Oh.
Slavery completely shattered any pretense of toleration.
Oh, right.
And then there's Roosevelt's court packing plan, which thankfully failed. That was a blatant attempt to rig the judicial system for partisan gain. Total violation of forbearance.
Right. So are you saying that this is all going downhill? That we've been losing these norms steadily?
Levitsky and Ziblatt argue that the decline started in the 90s, leading to the extreme polarization we see today.
Okay.
They point to figures like Newt Gingrich, who brought this incredibly aggressive, scorched earth style to politics.
Right.
Demonizing opponents, obstructing at all costs.
Right.
That was once unthinkable, but it's become the norm now.
Right. Okay, so we've got these warning signs, we've got these eroding norms, it's all pretty bleak. But is there anything we can actually do about it, or are we just doomed to watch democracy crumble?
No, definitely not doomed. Levitsky and Ziblatt are actually pretty clear that citizens have a huge role to play.
Okay.
First and foremost, they say we need to be aware of the warning signs. If you see a leader denying their opponent's legitimacy, trying to undermine elections, don't ignore it. Speak up, call it out, hold them accountable.
It's like pay attention not just to what they say, but what they actually do. Like, are they packing the courts? Are they attacking the free press? Those are all red flags we can't afford to ignore.
Exactly. And we can't just accept gridlock and dysfunction as the new normal.
Right.
We need to demand better from our elected officials. Push for compromise, insist on accountability, and make it clear that we expect them to uphold democratic values.
Okay, that makes sense. But beyond voting, how can we actually, make a difference?
Well, it's about staying engaged, not just during elections. Contact your representatives, participate in local government, support organizations that are fighting to protect democratic institutions.
So it's like, don't just get mad on Twitter, actually do something.
Exactly. And it goes even deeper than that. Levitsky and Ziblatt argue that we need to defend those democratic norms in our everyday lives. Having respectful conversations with people who hold different views.
Right.
Challenging misinformation and conspiracy theories.
Okay.
Fostering a culture of tolerance and civility.
Yeah.
All that stuff that seems to be in short supply these days.
Yeah. I feel like that's the hardest part, honestly. It's easy to just get cynical, to retreat into our echo chambers where everyone agrees with us.
Right, but that's exactly what authoritarians want.
Right.
They thrive on cynicism and apathy. So we need to resist that urge.
Okay.
We need to have faith in the power of collective action, believe that defending these values actually matters.
Okay, I'm with you. But the book focuses mostly on leaders and institutions, right? What about the role of everyday citizens in all this? Like, how do we contribute to the problem?
That's a great question because, it's easy to point fingers at politicians. But are we any better? Are we retreating into echo chambers, only consuming information that confirms our biases? Are we engaging in the same dehumanizing rhetoric we condemn in our leaders?
Ouch. Those are some tough questions. But I guess that's the point, right? We need to look in the mirror, too.
Exactly. Because if we want to save democracy, it starts with each of us taking responsibility for our own actions.
It's easy to get caught up in all the doom and gloom, when we talk about this stuff, but constantly focusing on how democracies die can be kind of paralyzing.
Right.
Like, what's the point of even trying if it's all going to fall apart anyway?
Yeah, and the authors actually address that. They remind us that democracies aren't static.
Right.
They're always evolving,
Okay.
being shaped by both citizens and leaders. And throughout history, there are countless examples of people pushing back against authoritarianism, demanding better, and actually winning.
Okay, that's reassuring. I mean, we need some hope here, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the book talks about these pro-democracy actors. And it's not just, politicians or activists. It's journalists, everyday citizens, anyone who's actively working to strengthen democratic institutions and hold power accountable.
So it's like we're not powerless, we have agency.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And one of the most powerful tools these pro-democracy actors have is the ability to shape public opinion by raising awareness, exposing corruption, really shining a light on these threats. They can create a climate where that kind of behavior is no longer acceptable.
Okay, so that's where the media comes in, right? Like a free and independent press is crucial for keeping things in check.
Totally, totally. It's about holding those in power accountable, informing the public, and providing context and analysis. Because just reporting the news isn't enough. We need to understand what it all means.
Which is especially important these days with all the misinformation flying around. It's like, how do you even know what to believe anymore?
Yeah, it's tough. And that's why those pro-democracy actors need to be smart about how they use social media and other platforms. Counter those false narratives, get the truth out there.
So it's not just about posting, like, angry rants on Twitter.
No, no. It's also about real-world organizing, building coalitions, and putting pressure on elected officials. The book talks about the civil rights movement as a powerful example of how sustained grassroots activism can lead to real, meaningful change.
And we're seeing that kind of energy in other movements around the world, too, right?
Yeah.
People demanding accountability, fighting for their rights.
Exactly. These movements are a powerful reminder that democracy isn't a passive thing. It requires active participation. You have to show up, stand up for what you believe in, and have faith in the power of collective action.
Okay. I'm feeling a little more empowered already, but honestly, sometimes it all feels so overwhelming. Like, what can one person really do?
Yeah. Don't underestimate the impact of even small acts of resistance. Voting, speaking out against injustice, supporting organizations that align with your values, those are all ways to contribute to a healthier democracy.
You know what? It's also about those tough conversations we were talking about earlier. The ones with friends and family who might see things differently, challenging misinformation, promoting tolerance. Maybe that's where it all starts.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, democracy is a journey, not a destination. It requires constant vigilance, adaptation, and a commitment to those core values we talked about.
And while it may be uncertain times, How Democracies Die is a great guidebook for navigating these choppy waters, so to speak.
Right. Understanding the warning signs, having those difficult conversations, taking action to protect our values, that's how we ensure our democracy not only survives, but thrives.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, dear listener, with this question. What role do you want to play in shaping the future of our democracy? What actions will you take, big or small, to make sure these values are passed on?
Because the fate of our democracy doesn't rest solely with politicians or institutions. It rests with each and every one of us.
Thanks for joining us on this thought-provoking journey. And remember, stay engaged, stay informed, and stay hopeful. We're in this together.